Sustainability is an issue that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. You've heard a lot about it today, and I want to mihi to my whanaunga Fontaine. Is she still here? There you are, cousin. Kia ora. Who talked about it from the sustainable procurement perspective. We heard it come through in all the kōrero from the rangatahi that we heard from today. It is inherent in everything. And while a lot of people think when you talk about sustainability, you're talking about natural resources, you're actually talking about much more than that. You're talking about things which are connected to the natural resources, which includes our people, it includes communities, it includes our economy and development. So it's no one thing. It's a very broad concept. And if you think about it, it's what we are doing today to ensure that our mokopuna and their mokopuna will have access to the resources that they need to survive and thrive āpōpō. That's all it's about. And if you think about what it takes to deliver on that, it means thinking slightly differently to how mainstream New Zealand thinks today. Not how we think, how mainstream New Zealand thinks today. It means making decisions differently. It means changing our view and how we view what's valuable and of value. It's about working in integrated ways that recognise the interconnectedness and interrelationships between nature, resources, culture, people and development. And I've already said it, but one of the reasons I was so nervous is because this is called Just Being Māori. This is how we think day to day. And so if there's something I want to say, it's that we have a lot to offer the world, and our traditional knowledge is a source of huge inspiration and value in helping to address some of the biggest sustainability issues that we face in Aotearoa, but also as a global community. It's not second nature to us. This stuff that we're talking about today, which is relevant and topical and that businesses all over New Zealand are investing significant amounts of money into, is actually first nature to us. It was first nature to our tipuna and remains so today, and it's something that we have a responsibility to instill in future generations so that we continue to promote sustainable development practices and revitalisation of practices that we once had that have been lost as we've modernised in society. I want to acknowledge, given all that I've said, that the real sustainability leaders are actually sitting out there in the audience. They're the ones who've presented, they're the ones whose stories we've heard, they're the ones whose stories are written in that program. All of those stories, all of those programs and initiatives are about sustainability. And whānau ora and sustainability are intrinsically linked. In fact, what I'd like to say as well is that sustainability is very much like whānau ora, in that it's not a program, it's not a thing, it's not something you deliver, it's an approach, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of knowing, it's a journey, it's an aspiration. And all of us are somewhere in that journey and on that spectrum and driving our whānau to better outcomes, and those outcomes are going to contribute to national outcomes and global outcomes. So I want to acknowledge that the real sustainability leaders are the ones sitting right next to you. They're the ones who've been actively engaged in projects that deliver whānau and community outcomes, who have actively held councils and governments to account, who actively monitor the health and well-being of our waterways, of our biodiversity, of our awa, our moana, of our kaimoana and our whenua, often because it's the right thing to do, not because anyone has funded them to do this. And I feel very humbled actually to be a part of this group, because that's happening there. And I'm purely somebody who works in this space for a big business. So why do we do this? The key reason why, and this is what sustainability is in a nutshell, is so that our mokopuna and future generations can have access to the resources that are so precious to our way of life and culture. There are some big challenges coming down the pipeline that we're talking about at a global and national level, And often our whānau and community are stuck doing the day-to-day, working at the coalface while these big things go on without input from the community into what we're doing. And I'm talking about things like climate change. I'm talking about things like water policy changes. I'm talking about things like driving towards the delivery of sustainable development goals, which as nations we've signed up to do. So there's a lot of activity in this space and not necessarily coordinated. So what I want to talk to you about today is this whole concept of sustainability, what it means and what's happening at a global and national level. And hopefully leave you with some food for thought as to how and where we, as whānau and as tangata whenua, fit in, and how we can further contribute to the sustainable objectives for Aotearoa, for the world, but most importantly for our generations yet to come. I mentioned briefly that people have different ideas about what sustainability is, so let me tell you what it is to me. Sustainability is about everything. It's about everything, and it's about ensuring we aren't taking away or diminishing the resources that we use to a point where they will not be sustainable into the future. It's about our pōpō. It's about our mokopuna, and it's about ensuring we do the right things today. And I look at the poster here, how will your mokopuna remember you? And to me, it's inherent in our thinking, but it's important that we continue to leave behind the knowledge and tools that our mokopuna in the future need to carry on this legacy. To do this requires new ways of thinking and doing. It requires us to change the value equation and how we view and recognise and account for value in our organisations. I've already mentioned this, but it requires us to recognise the interdependency and connectedness between people, the environment and the economy. And it requires us to think beyond ourselves and to think broadly and in new and innovative ways about how we add value. And I would argue that for us as Māori, it requires us to look back to our tipuna, to our traditions and our traditional knowledge, because our tipuna were experts in this stuff. And a lot of the knowledge that we have has been forgotten and rediscovered, and it's a job that we've got to continue to do. It also requires us to look forward and to think about what kind of future our mokopuna and future generations are going to have and what we want to leave behind. And I have two little stories related to this point that I want to share with you. One is about my sons, so I'll start here. I have many conversations with my sons. One is 15, the other is 9, both very different. One is very scientific and facts-based. The other one is very feelings-based, and let's just say he went through a Maui phase. It's very, very gorgeous. And when they were about 9 and 4, we had this conversation. I was trying to instill the importance of education into my big son. So I asked him, what is it, son, that you want to be when you grow up? He goes, I want to be rich. I said, okay, what does that mean to you? He said, it means making lots of money. I said, all right. So if you want to make lots of money, you've got to do good at school. You know, you've got to go to university, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to start here. At 9 years old, you've got to be good at reading, writing and maths, okay? Kaapua. He goes, yep, all right. Meanwhile, the other side of the car, the 4-year-old pipes up. And he goes to me, excuse me, Mama, in his little voice. I said, yes. He said, my puka puka says that you're rich when you have ngā taonga o ngā tipuna. And I thought, yes, that's right. Damn it, bad parent. His favourite book at the time was Taniwha by Robin Kahukua. So this might explain where this concept came from. And he said to me, well, that's how rich I want to be, Mama. I want to be rich in ngā taonga o aku tipuna. And I thought to myself, yeah, that's right. And you know, when you change the conversation and change how you view what rich is and what value is, it actually changes your whole pathway about how you aim to get to that point. The second story I have relates to the first, and it's about my koro and how he, who's no longer here, left us some jewels so that we could rediscover some of the knowledge that had been lost to our whānau. So my koro, Hinga Smith from Tolaga Bay, passed away 2 years ago now. He was raised and born in Tolaga Bay. All he's known his whole life is Tolaga Bay. And then a year before he died, he produced a book for us, which outlined our ngaitahu whakapapa, where we connect, where to find the urupā that our tipuna were buried in, who our whānau were, all the information we needed to reconnect. And then he passed away before we could ever really find out who that side was or how we fit in. So last year, the Smith whānau, the whole Smith whānau, came down to the South Island and we went to Moeraki. And we met David Higgins. And he's the one who reconnected us to our whānau there. And it's because my koro had the foresight to leave behind the tools I needed to reconnect and the tools that our whānau needed to reconnect to that side of who we are. So I just thought I'd share those stories because it's about understanding our role today and the role that we have as connectors for our mokopuna to our tipuna. And that's inherent in what sustainability is. And while there's a big, corporate focus on sustainability at the moment, the concepts that drive it are actually very simple. And I feel very fortunate because I do well in my job because I get to think Māori and be Māori in everything I do. So as someone who works in sustainability in an organisation, that organisation being Contact Energy, my role is primarily to focus on ensuring the sustainability of the resources that we rely on to generate electricity and to ensure we're managing and minimising our environmental and social impacts. But my real job is to change and challenge how people think. My job is to make sure that we start giving further consideration to natural resources and people and communities in all the decisions that we make and change how we view value. It's about ensuring that the people who have the power to make these decisions know what's at stake. And all it takes is a change of perspective. I wrote down the quote that Ngā Rauira, if he's still here, said in his speech earlier. All great revolutions start with the mind. And that's exactly what my job is. And when you talk about sustainability, that's exactly what the primary role is. Right now, and at this point in time, there's been a huge shift in my business and other businesses across New Zealand and the world towards recognising the role that we must play in addressing big environmental and sustainability issues. Things like climate change, biodiversity, water management, access to energy, affordable energy, and to give greater consideration to these things in how we make decisions. In other words, thinking about our impact beyond ourselves. Recognising that as a business, we're not the centre of the universe, we are part of an ecosystem. And that's a huge mind shift for big businesses. Globally, we've also seen a couple of key things take place. Firstly, in 2015, nations across the world, including New Zealand, adopted the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are 17 global goals that aim to end poverty, protect the planet and ensure prosperity for all. These goals are not just for governments, they're not just for businesses, they're for all people who want to support a sustainable development agenda. And they're useful in that it provides focus towards how we can each contribute to these big global sustainability issues. In the private sector, this framework is being used by businesses to report on how they are contributing to sustainable development. Governments who have signed up to these goals report on their progress to the United Nations to make sure that they're focused on the right issues. And there are a number of groups advocating for the adoption of a common language around our social and environmental obligations, responsibilities and actions so that people can more easily measure how we're performing in this space. These goals are positive in that they provide a universal framework, one that's been adopted widely across the world and across our businesses. And while I support the objectives of the 17 goals and believe it's a useful context for us, I also believe that the challenges that we face in Aotearoa are unique and that we require action on the specific issues and impacts that we have at a local level. So my challenge to us here is how do we give greater focus to the issues that we're facing at a local and community and whānau level and ensure that businesses, governments and other institutions are aligning with what we think is important. I also believe there is power in naming and framing your own agenda. And so the way you frame an issue ultimately changes the way you deal with it. And as tangata whenua, we have our own language, we have our own knowledge, and we should be using these to create our own solutions to the issues that we face. And often when you have to align to someone else's reo, to someone else's framework, you lose part of the culture which drives the innovation and the ultimate solution to what you're trying to achieve. So I think we have an important role to play in Aotearoa in helping to name and frame these issues for us and our communities. I also think this helps Indigenous people around the world, because we can help empower them to also use their own culture to help drive their own responses to the sustainability issues that they face. And I want to briefly mention recently a project that I was part of through Contact. I went to Kenya to support a Maasai community and an energy company build a relationship around geothermal resources in a place called Old Keria. And we went in partnership with one of our iwi partners, Ngāti Tahu Ngāti Whāua, who are based around between Taupo and Rotorua. We could have gone and said, you know, we have all the answers in the world, this is how you do it. But we didn't. We went over and we said, well, what do the Maasai say? What does their culture say? Have you listened to them? And that was our approach when we went over. Because a lot of the time, you know, we get tied up on the fact that we have solutions for ourselves, and we know that other people, we support other people's rangatiratanga. So how do you help someone while still recognising their rangatiratanga? You can amplify their voice. And that's one of the things that we did in Kenya. And I just wanted to briefly mention that because I think we do play an important role globally, not just locally. And that as tangata whenua and as Indigenous people, we can help drive that movement around the world. The other significant global and national issue that's had a lot of attention recently is the issue of climate change. Climate change is now ranked as the #1 risk in the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report. There are large investment houses across the world pulling their money from people who aren't doing enough to tackle climate change. There is a huge shift globally to drive action on climate change. The Paris Climate Agreement signed in 2016 saw countries including New Zealand step up their commitment to address this issue. And it is a significant issue that will have significant impacts on the environment, communities and the economy. It has the potential to disrupt our food systems, displace people, change our environment permanently, increase costs for all our whānau and affect every part of our lives. It is truly a global issue and one that highlights that systems thinking is required to solve our big sustainability issues. All nations contribute to climate change through the emissions that we put into the atmosphere, although some more than others. All nations will be affected by the effects of climate change, although some more than others, and some devastatingly so. And in particular, vulnerable and Indigenous communities will be highly affected. So there is significant work going on in this space globally, as well as here in New Zealand, to both mitigate the effects of climate change and through supporting communities who need to adapt to do so. And I want to acknowledge quickly the work that Ngāi Tahu are doing in this space. There are a lot of iwi who are working on this issue quite intensively. For a lot of our whānau, climate change is an issue that's sort of way out in the horizon. We know there are more immediate issues for whānau. And what I've got to say further on down the speech, but I'm going to say it now too, is that there are multiple sites of struggle, as my father would tell me. Multiple sites of struggle, and we've got to be in all of them. So while climate change seems like it's an issue over there, big issue later on down the track, it's important we have people working across all these spaces to make sure our voice is heard and we're part of the solutions. At a local level here in New Zealand, the government, communities and organisations are all grappling with this issue. The key message that's coming through is there is a desire to change, but there are huge barriers that face our ability to make the changes we need within the time frame we need to make them. We must be more ambitious, we must do more, and we must do it faster. If I can give an example from Contact, where I work, we have adopted a goal of decarbonising the energy system in New Zealand, recognising that energy is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, which is driving climate change. New Zealand's electricity system is currently 80% renewable, and the electricity generation component contributes approximately 5% towards New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions. Overall, energy as a whole contributes around 40% towards New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions. So we have a big part to play in addressing this issue. We're looking at how we reduce our impact from our own operations while ensuring that we still maintain affordable access to energy for our whānau, and that's a challenge. We could go 100% renewable tomorrow and drive up costs, but we don't do that because that's really important that we consider how this impacts on whānau and how households who need to be able to afford energy for their own well-being. We're also contributing to emissions reductions in the wider energy sector through supporting the uptake of electric vehicles, conversion of industrial heat processing and boiler systems to get New Zealand off coal and gas where we can. It is a transition, it's a journey, and we're committed to that journey. So we have whole teams of people working on this issue. Some of the brightest minds, scientists, looking at what the barriers are to converting to low carbon solutions and trying to address them. Taking a leaf out of the whānau ora approach, we're also working with our stakeholders. And I'm reminded when Whaiatari was Minister for Disability Issues and I was her press secretary, the line she used to say, "Nothing about us without us. Nothing about us without us." And that's what I was thinking as we were building our decarbonisation process. So we've gone about developing this in a completely different way, in that we're actually asking people what works, which comes from that inspiration around whānau ora and about being empowered to drive your own solutions. So we're actually using a stakeholder-led process to help us develop our solutions in this space. And we're working with people like Ngāi Tahu who come in and give us advice around what we should be doing. What we've found is that the challenge is not smarts, nor is it willingness. It's systems. It's unlocking entrenched systems that prevent us from doing the right thing, or prevent us from transitioning. And while I'm talking about climate change here, it's systematic across a range of issues that we face as Māori. Systems that prevent us from doing the right thing. I said earlier that line my father likes to throw around. My father's Graham Smith, by the way. He'd say there's multiple sites of struggle. And my addition to that is, yes, there's multiple sites of struggle and we need to be engaged in all of them. We need people on the ground, like you, delivering activities that help sustain our whānau and build our resilience. We also need people, our minds, challenging and changing the systems that put pressure on our whānau and our natural resources. We need people influencing across a range of government, business, community initiatives and more, to drive the changes in practice that we need to see to create a better future. We need tangata whenua to champion our unique cultural perspectives and to claim our own knowledge and solutions. Because a lot of the time, I see lots of solutions which are inspired by tangata whenua, renamed in a Pākehā way, and claimed and owned by others. So we need to reclaim that space, and to do that, we need to name the problems ourselves and be part of the solution. So, of course, intrinsic in these wider discussions are also the issues of water and biodiversity, which are also major issues for us here in Aotearoa. Water scarcity has started wars overseas, and water scarcity is going to become an increasing global problem. Here in Aotearoa, we're actually blessed with a lot of water, yet competing interests and increasing use and lack of good systems and practice around water management, that we too are facing the challenge of fighting just to look after our wai, to protect it for our future generations and our mokopuna. Again, multiple sites of struggle here, and the battle for our wai is being fought everywhere. We have some amazing environmental warriors and champions who are leading the charge in the space at a community level, who are monitoring our waters, who are championing its protection, and I want to acknowledge in particular the work of those fighting hard to protect Te Waikoropupu Springs and Golden Bay as just one example. There are many Poroti Springs up north, waterways in Putaruru. These are happening all over the country. The objective here is a no-brainer: protect our wai. And with all this talk going on about the need to protect our wai and preserve water quality, the right outcome, while simple in principle, is so very difficult to achieve. Again, because of the systems that have been put in place to protect other interests ahead of those of Papatūānuku and future generations. And again, I just want to acknowledge the idea that came out earlier from Ngā Rauira about entrenching the rights of Papatūānuku in our constitution. Fantastic idea, totally support. So that's really it for me, but before I finish off, I want to go back to what I said at the start of this talk, which is that sustainability is about recognising the interconnectedness and interdependent relationships between the environment, people, development and the economy. Not only are they interconnected, but they are equal in importance. Making sustainable decisions is about getting the right balance. And to do that requires having a strong set of values and principles and knowing what you stand for and where you're going. And I think that's something that we as Māori, as whānau, tangata whenua, are fortunate enough to have in spades. Often, and particularly in business, we don't get the balance right when looking at these things. There's a whole system out there that prioritises economic outcomes over the environmental and social good that we need to preserve in order to realise long-term value and in order to maintain these resources for our mokopuna. The challenge to us is to rebalance the equation by giving equal consideration to how we use and maintain our whenua and whānau resources. The journey is as important as the destination. So to finish off, I've got one more story for you, which is this is a conversation between me and my koro. So a few years ago now, when I was like maybe early 20s, maybe even a teenager, I did a weaving course, which is not my natural habitat, I will just say. I did it at Auckland University. So part of it was a practical thing, so I had to weave something, so I weaved a roro. And part of it was you had to write a paper to describe the process that you went through and produce a report for this paper. So what I did as part of this was I interviewed my koro. My koro is Hirini Mokomid, so his expertise in Māori art. The conversation went like this. Koro, I made a roro. Is it a taonga? The answer was, no, it's a plate. It's for kai, it's noa, it's not a taonga. I said, okay. Is it a taonga if it will never be used as a plate? No, it's still a plate. Okay. Well, is it a taonga if I intend to hang it on my wall and it's going to be ornamental? It'll never be a plate. I'll call it something else. No, it's a plate. I said, okay then, koro. Challenge accepted, I said in my head. What if I told you this roro was made by your mokopuna and it's the only roro she's ever going to make and she's going to leave it behind for her mokopuna to inherit? Is it a taonga? He said, yes, bub, in that case it's a taonga. So I wanted to tell you the story because to me it illustrates a couple of really important points about sustainability. Firstly, our natural resources are there to help sustain our whānau. They're not there to be locked up. They're there to support, and this is what I said in my little abstract, it's a symbiotic relationship. We support and sustain one another. And so we need to remember that in how we approach natural resource management decisions. In this case, a roro or a plate made out of harakeke is an everyday item. But once upon a time, sorry, it's not an everyday item, once upon a time, that was a vital item in the lives of our tipuna. It's not anymore, obviously, we've got other plates, but it just highlights, how changing dynamics change the way you view different taonga. The notion of sustainability does not prevent or preclude or tell us how best to use our resources. Simply, it accepts that our relationship is mutually dependent and requires us to think about how we use it within reason to ensure its ongoing availability for the next generation. Secondly, I wanted to tell you that story to illustrate to you that which is rare has value. In this case, a roro made by me, because I never repeated that. But thinking more broadly about this, it could be our tuna, it could be our kaura, it could be our paua. Whether it's a natural resource or a social resource or other, if it's rare, it has value. And the challenge when thinking about sustainability is to see its value before it becomes rare and prevent that from happening. And that requires vision. So again, I just want to finish off by acknowledging the many of you who are already working in this space, and I've heard some inspiring kōrero just over the last day. So I feel very humbled to stand up here and actually share that with you, because I think you're actually doing way more than I am on a day-to-day basis. But we're all here to help make our mokopuna's lives better. So on that note, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora.